following is a CUNY TV special presentation.
Rob started his career in public service at age 21 when he was elected to the Mount Pleasant Board of Education. He wanted to have a career in radio, serving as station manager and program director of the Catholic channel on Sirius XM, where he also hosted a weekly show. He helped launch ESPN Radio in New York and became the station's senior producer. In 2003, he was elected to the Westchester County Board of Legislators, where he served through 2005. In 2006, he was elected county executive and is currently serving his second term. Rob has worked aggressively to cut taxes in Westchester. He has frozen or cut taxes every year since he's been in office and reduced county spending by more than 5%. Rob, we are pleased to have you here this morning, and ABNY is eager to hear your vision for New York State. Ladies and gentlemen, County Executive Rob Astorino. I didn't take your speech, I have my speech.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning, everybody. It is great to be with you. We have, 34 days to go. So it's really flying by fast, and we're enjoying ourselves. And today is a day that is really important because we've been talking about what we want to do starting in January, but I'm going to really outline it here for everybody really succinctly on what we see the state as and becoming, and I think it's really important. And some of it's a reality check, and obviously some of it is a vision of what I will do. So I want to thank ABNY. Bill, thank you very much, and everybody, thank you for being with us this morning. I also wanted to talk this morning about two of New York's most famous governors, Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I'm sure some of you have watched or at least heard of the PBS series on the Roosevelts. It gives us renewed appreciation of two of our best presidents, as well as our barrier-breaking humanitarian First Lady. Theodore and Franklin were fifth cousins. Theodore was a Republican, Franklin was a Democrat. Teddy was from Long Island, Franklin was from Hyde Park in the Hudson Valley. Both were state legislators, both were governors. Both were supporters of the other. Franklin idolized Theodore, and Theodore, in turn, was very supportive of Franklin's rise, even though they didn't share political parties. But they did share many things in common: their intestinal fortitude and their fearlessness. Each man overcame disabilities. Theodore had childhood illness and severe asthma. Franklin was afflicted with polio at the age of 39. Each refused to take no for an answer. They overcame doubters. Never shied from the big moment, never shied from the arena. Each man relentlessly attacked political corruption, especially during his time in Albany. They attacked the party bosses. They attacked the status quo. Now, I love to imagine how either man would react to the state of affairs today in Albany and in Washington. I'd like to think that they would react as I am. Or rather, I'd like to think I'm reacting the way they would. Now, if I was born in Astor, even an Astor Roosevelt instead of an Astorino, my reform plans would probably come a little easier. But I don't have the money of an Astor. I'm checking the bloodlines, though, but I don't have the money of an Astor. But I do have the commitment of reform of a Roosevelt and the fearlessness to combat corruption and the status quo. And that is why I am running for governor. New York is on a losing path. And to some, I may sound like a broken record, but the only thing broken really is our state. So entrenched is the status quo in our state government that corruption is now an accepted business practice in Albany. In 2010, the University of Illinois did a study that ranked New York as having the most corrupt government in the country. This is the University of Illinois. And it's only gotten worse. In just the past 2 years, 9 state legislators have been removed from office due to unethical and/or criminal behavior. And several more are under indictment or under investigation for corruption, including Andrew Cuomo, who ironically once promised to clean up Albany. Now, rampant corruption in government erodes the public trust. Apathy discourages good people from getting involved in the process. Also, when politicians look to help themselves unethically, it often costs taxpayers. Graft is expensive. Bribery, theft of services, racketeering, and tax evasion all involve abuse of taxpayers and tax dollars. In addition, politicians involved in corruption aren't focusing their energies on what they should be focusing on, protecting taxpayers and promoting economic growth. New York has the highest taxes in the nation and the worst economic outlook. You don't think that can be at least partly attributable to having the nation's most corrupt government? Now, we see it and we hear it all the time from Andrew Cuomo. Everything is wonderful. It is not. New York is the highest tax state in the nation. We have the third worst economy and the worst economic outlook. Our business climate is the third worst in the nation. And you already know we have the most corruption. So what does it all add up to? 400,000 New Yorkers giving up and throwing in the towel in the last 4 years. No state lost more of its citizens than New York. Now, the election is on November 4th, but so far, 400,000 New Yorkers have already voted with their feet. Now, I was twice elected in Westchester because I governed in a bipartisan way. Together, Republicans and the Democrat majority on the Board of Legislators, we cut the county property tax levy more than any county in New York State. We reduced spending more than any county, and today have a $1.7 billion county budget, which is less than the $1.8 billion budget when I took office. We have AAA credit ratings. And the 30,000 private sector jobs that were created in Westchester over the last 4 years is one of the best rates in the state. Now, we also implemented tough reforms, but showed a willingness to compromise to achieve larger objectives. While we cut spending, we actually slightly increased the safety net programs to provide a helping hand to those who are the least among us. We asked our government unions to chip in a small portion for their own health care, and that's what we negotiated. 7 of our 8 unions have agreed. And before I asked any of them, we made sure the law was changed to require myself and every elected official and their staffs to contribute as well. Now, this is what leadership looks like. Like Teddy and FDR, I was doubted, but I knew what we could accomplish if we weren't worried about the next election. Now, Andrew Cuomo's leadership is in protecting the status quo. He pats himself on the back for holding the state's operating budget to only 13.5% increase over his first 4 years. In my first 4 years, the county's operating budget was cut 3.4%. Now, if my level of spending restraint had been applied instead to Andrew Cuomo's budgets, we would have a budget that is $13.9 billion less in the state today. And when you spend almost twice as much as Florida, yet have the same population, a 13.5% increase in spending is not responsible. It's status quo at the best. State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli has questioned the state's budget, structurally, the stability of it, and he did it earlier this year because he said it's relying way too much on budget gimmicks and extraordinary federal aid. We had the third lowest state economic growth this year, 0.7%, less than half the anemic national average of 1.8%. If upstate were its own state, by the way, it would rank dead last in job creation. And many of New York cities are impoverished. Over half the children living in Rochester and Buffalo live in poverty, the third and fourth highest rate of any in the nation. There are neighborhoods in the 5 boroughs with even higher rates of poverty. According to the U.S. Conference of Mayors, Binghamton ranks dead last, 363rd out of 363 metropolitan areas for economic growth outlook. Utica ranks 362. New York has 5 metro areas in the bottom 10 and 10 metro areas in the bottom 20. There are rural areas that even look worse. Now, I've been to all 62 counties. I have seen it with my own eyes. I have heard it with my own ears. People are hurting in this state. And in spite of all of this, Cuomo says that New York has turned the corner. All right. I can hear what you're saying. Astorino, all right, we know things are bad, or at least you're saying everything's bad. Well, what are you going to do as governor? Well, I look at the state much the same way that many of you may have looked at New York City 21 years ago, when the murder rate was 5 times what it is today, when people and businesses were fleeing, when it appeared the city was ungovernable. Back then, city voters did something unimaginable. They took a chance on a Republican promising reform. Now, the choice in this November's election is, do we want to turn around the state like the city was turned around over 20 years ago, or do we want to continue to pursue the path of mediocrity and status quo? One where pockets of New York City do fine, while other neighborhoods suffer. The suburbs tread water and struggle with the highest property taxes in America, and most of upstate continues on their long and steady decline, where a college degree or even a high school diploma is a one-way ticket out of this state. Or do we take a different path, one where we pursue aggressive, game-changing, and paradigm-shifting reforms? And this is largely what Andrew Cuomo promised 4 years ago. In fact, in his first State of the State address, he said, we need radical reform. He was right, but we didn't get it. We need it now more than ever. So here's what I will do as governor. Hydrofracking. To rescue a large swath of upstate New York, we'll move forward with safe and clean natural gas exploration and extraction in the southern tier. President Obama supports hydrofracking. The EPA and the Energy Department, Senators Schumer and Gillibrand here in New York do as well. And it's safe, they say. We'll move forward with the proper environmental safeguards and join the 30 other states in harvesting this abundant energy resource just beneath the ground, creating tens of thousands of jobs desperately needed for upstate, billions in new tax revenue for the whole city and state, and lower electric rates for all ratepayers and cleaner air for everyone. On day one, I will sign an executive order instituting moratoriums on any new regulation and a thorough review of approximately 750,000 regulations which are currently on the books. Now, government doesn't create private sector jobs, but they should partner with the business community, helping to create the climate for growth, not relish throwing unnecessary obstacles in their way. Now, I sometimes think politicians in Albany create regulations just so you can have to hire lobbyists and make political contributions to get around them. Now, I'll also invest a large portion of the over $5 billion in bank settlement money from BNP Paribas and others into the most desperately needed repairs to our roads, bridges, and mass transit, improving safety and quality of life and creating thousands of good jobs. That includes, by the way, the new Tappan Zee Bridge. Technology startups. We'll accelerate technology startups by modeling after what Silicon Valley has done and does very well, encouraging private capital, streamlining the tech transfer process at state colleges and universities, passing a law that bans the enforceability of non-compete agreements, and supporting entrepreneurial networks. You know, there's 12,000 members of a San Francisco-based Cornell Alumni Association. We have excellent colleges and universities, and we need to retain the brainpower and empower them to start ventures in this city and in this state. Education. You know, I love the argument about Common Core, that if you're not for Common Core, you're not for raising standards. We will replace Common Core with better standards developed by New York education experts and with input from parents and teachers. The myth of Common Core is that the standards are high, but many experts in this field say they are not. In fact, the mathematics and the English language arts content expert on the Common Core Validation Committee refused to endorse the standards, saying they were of poor quality. Now, Dr. James Milgram and Dr. Sandra Stotsky have endorsed my education plan, and I ask that you go to robastorino.com, and I want you to look at this. It's a deep plan. Learn about our proposals to have direct elections for the Board of Regents, increase the availability of vocational training and STEM study in our schools, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. Better prepare a student to succeed at college, career, or in life, and give students and parents more choices for school and for study. Repeal the SAFE Act. As governor, I will repeal the unconstitutional SAFE Act, because as my running mate Sheriff Chris Moss says, and nearly every sheriff and law enforcement officer in New York State says, it does nothing to make us safer. It only turns law-abiding citizens into criminals. And even the New York Times recently wrote that that law does little. Now, we have something in Westchester called Safer Communities. And as governor, we will focus on real solutions to make our communities safer. We'll emulate what we're doing in Westchester to tackle community violence, focus on the breakdowns in the mental health system, improve coordination and collaboration among educators, law enforcement, parents, and health and mental health professionals, and train all stakeholders to identify mental health and sociopathic symptoms early on and getting a young person the treatment he or she needs. Sheriff Chris Moss and I will also lead efforts in cracking down on the growing heroin epidemic. Now, speaking of cracking down, Chris and I will crack down on Albany corruption. We'll increase transparency and accountability and demand term limits for all state lawmakers and a loss of taxpayer-funded pension for any public official convicted of felony corruption. Now, we'll also create a truly independent state commission on public ethics. 5 members appointed by the judiciary with an independent budget to receive and investigate complaints of official misconduct, including sexual harassment and assault. We also need to redefine compassion in this country, and as governor, I'll redefine it in this state. We'll undertake an unprecedented effort to combat poverty, but it will be guided by the goals of empowerment, self-reliance, and opportunity, not by simply throwing more money into welfare programs. Generational dependency is nothing to celebrate. We'll celebrate independence and empowerment. We'll transform our public assistance programs, offer educational choice to the parents of children in failing schools, provide skills training and entrepreneurial assistance, and work with local church and community leaders to help emphasize the critical and often neglected role of the father of the life in a child. So, last but not least, we will lower taxes. In 1993, Money Magazine called New York State a tax hell. Unfortunately, the Tax Foundation still ranks New York as #1 for the highest combined state and local taxes. Now, if we're to turn around our state, we need to be competitive. And to be competitive, we need to lower hellish tax rates. To do so requires a bold approach, and that's what I'm unveiling today. We will cut income taxes across the board, and I will direct my budget division and tax department on day one to come up with a detailed plan for a flatter and fairer system that will have 2 brackets instead of 8, which will give New York one of the lowest tax rates in the Northeast, making New York much more competitive than it's ever been in over a generation. Now, my inclination is for 2 tax rates, 4% for all income under $200,000 or $300,000 for a married couple, and 6% on marginal income above $200,000 or $300,000 for a married couple. I also want to see New York's 4-page tax form reduced to 1 single page. Taxes should be simple and transparent. They shouldn't be so complicated and convoluted that you have to hire an accountant or lawyers or buy expensive software just to figure out what you owe. Now, for those who work and live in the city, I'm sure you can appreciate that any reduction in state personal and business tax rates are especially beneficial in a city that imposes its own taxes in both categories. So just think, if we get the top state personal income tax rate down to 6%, the combined marginal income tax rate in the city would be under 10% for the first time since 1960. So you can clap. I would clap. I mean, you know. Now, the exact rates and the timeline will be developed next year after very careful review of the state finances and the budget situation which we're going to be getting into. We have no choice, if we're to turn this state around and not compete with other states, some of which don't even have a state income tax. Some other highlights of the tax plan: we want to cut the corporate franchise tax to 5.9% by 2019, eliminate the estate tax by 2020, make permanent the property tax cap, eliminate the 18A tax assessment on utility bills. Now, to help pay for these tax cuts, we will pledge to reduce or hold flat state budget spending in each of the next 4 years, matching what I did in Westchester. We'll eliminate most of the $1.7 billion in business tax credits, starting with the $420 million New York film tax credit. We'll further tackle state and local costs, which will help lower property taxes by reforming Medicaid. And in doing so, we will allow, or at least work to allow through Congress, counties to opt out of non-mandated services provided under the state's program, so long as they meet the federal requirements. Eliminating spousal refusal, cutting down on long-term health care costs by incentivizing families to keep elderly seniors in their homes, and increasing efforts to crack down on Medicaid fraud on the front end, not at the back after they've already received the money. We'll reform the pension system by offering new public employees a voluntary pension choice between the current defined benefit plan and a defined contribution plan like a 401k. Now, CUNY has had such a choice since the 1960s, and 71% of employees have chosen the defined contribution style plan. We'll also reform public sector health benefits by outlawing any further promise of future retiree health benefits that is not pre-funded, and encouraging the creation of retiree medical trusts for all employees. In addition, our pro-growth-oriented tax cuts can be counted on for some revenue growth, and tax revenues from natural gas will also help add to the state treasury. Now, while we reduce taxes and spending, we must also reduce the nation's highest debt load. And I support the constitutional amendment that would ban backdoor borrowing by state authorities, restore voter control over debt as stipulated by the Constitution, require that all state debt be issued by the comptroller, impose a binding cap on the amount of state debt, and prohibit the issuance of debt for non-capital purposes. So look, I'm a realist. I've been through this already in Westchester. This won't be easy, but we must move in this direction if we're going to get this state moving in the right direction. And we can't just nibble at the margins and then declare false victory. We got to attack the problem head on, as other states chose to do years ago. We can and we will do this. Now, I was elected on a mandate and a pledge in 2009 and delivered on all 15 pledges I made during that campaign. And I didn't do it alone, by the way. I worked with Republicans and the Democrat majority on the County Board of Legislators. So we could do it again at the state level. We have to. Before I conclude, I just want to touch on the relationship between the state capitol and City Hall. Historically, there's been a conflicted relationship between the two, regardless of whether the principals are from the same party or not. In fact, sometimes the conflict was actually greater when they shared parties. Now, I recognize the importance of New York City to the state and to the country, and I want the city to succeed. The city has to succeed. We need it to. On election night last November, I called Mayor de Blasio to congratulate him and to wish him well. And I think one of the best decisions this mayor made was in selecting Bill Bratton as police commissioner. Now, Rudy Giuliani and Mike Bloomberg knew and showed that the unlimited potential of this city, if its residents feel safe and secure, and if crime could be kept under control. Now, in selecting Bratton, Mayor de Blasio showed that he does not want to go back to the bad old days when it comes to crime. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said when it comes to the city's finances, at least in the early going. The mayor's first budget increased spending 7%. That's a sharp increase, and hopefully it won't be the sign of a trend. The budget also contained gimmicks to help it pretend to be balanced, when in fact it borrowed billions to pay for retroactive pay increases to reward his union backers. His union payoffs have doubled next year's deficits, from $1.1 billion to $2.2 billion, and in 3 years, from $370 million, where we started, to $3.2 billion. It's incredible. It's the type of budgeting that got New York City in major trouble back in the 70s. And I know you know this, and Bill's father, Lou, of course, created ABNY because of this and helped get it back on track. A legacy from that time is the New York State Financial Control Board that still exists today, and provides the state with powerful oversight over the city budgets and finances. Now, as governor, I would appoint to the board the brightest minds in accounting and finance, and I would make it publicly known that the board will be watching very closely, not just over the city's next budget, but examining closely their current budget as well. Governor Cuomo's indifference to the board is further evidenced by the fact that he hasn't even bothered to appoint any new members to the board. All of them are holdovers from Eliot Spitzer. And you should all be very wary of the deal that was cut between the Working Families Party, Mayor de Blasio, and Andrew Cuomo. What was promised? We should all be very concerned about that. But hopefully I can make that a moot point. But still, you need to know it. So Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt both died at relatively young ages. Still, they each made their indelible marks on American history and New York history. And I got into this race because I know New York is on the wrong track. I know we can do better. The forces of status quo are very powerful and unrelenting, and that comes from both Democrats and Republicans. The challenge I face in this election is great, but really pales in comparison to the challenges that this state face. I am undaunted, by the way, and I know what is right. It's what needs to be done. And if afforded the opportunity, I will leave my indelible mark on the state and the future of this great city. Not for my own sake, but for the sake of future generations of New Yorkers who would love to stay here if they could afford to and if opportunity is afforded to them. So that's our task. And we are all in this together. So let's not sit idly while our children and grandchildren leave this state. This is the Empire State. People should be flocking to New York. Now, I know deep down that you all know that. So the mission's clear. The choices are very clear. But this state is worth fighting for. Improving New Yorkers' lives is worth fighting for. And I'm all in. So let's make New York great again. Thank you very, very much.
Rob, thank you for your insights. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you very shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Very good luck. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah.